Did you know that sometimes the most chilling mysteries happen right in your own backyard? I'm about to share a story that will make you question everything you think you know about coincidences. My name is Frank. I'm 68 years old, and after 42 years as a detective with the Chicago Police Department, I thought I'd seen it all. But what happened to me 3 months ago in my quiet suburban neighborhood changed everything I believed about closed cases and pure chance. Picture this. You're enjoying your golden years, tending to your garden, watching the evening news, living that peaceful retirement life you've earned after decades of chasing down criminals and solving cases. The last thing you expect is for one of your old cases to literally walk up to your front door. But that's exactly what happened to me on a Tuesday evening in September, and I'm still getting chills thinking about it. Before I dive into this mind-bending story, I need to set the scene properly because the details matter more than you might think. It was 1987, and I was a young detective, barely 5 years on the force. I caught a case that would haunt me for the next 36 years. A 7-year-old girl named Sarah Mitchell went missing from Lincoln Park. Beautiful kid, blonde hair, blue eyes, wearing a red dress with white polka dots. Her mother had turned away for just 30 seconds to buy ice cream from a vendor, and when she looked back, Sarah was gone. We searched everywhere. I mean everywhere. We dragged the lake, combed through every abandoned building in a 5-mile radius, interviewed hundreds of people, followed up on countless tips. The case consumed me. I worked 16-hour days, skipped meals, barely slept. My wife at the time, God rest her soul, used to say I cared more about finding Sarah than I did about our own family. She wasn't wrong, and I'm not proud of that. But some cases just get under your skin. After 18 months of investigation, we had nothing. No body, no witnesses, no solid leads. The case went cold, and eventually I had to move on to other cases. But Sarah Mitchell never left my mind. Not when I made detective sergeant, not when I retired, not ever. I kept her case file in my home office, and every few years I'd pull it out, hoping that with fresh eyes and new perspective, I might see something we missed. Now, fast forward to 3 months ago. I'm in my kitchen making my evening coffee when I hear my doorbell ring. Living alone since my wife passed 2 years ago, I don't get many visitors, especially not at 7 in the evening. I shuffle to the front door, and through the peephole, I see a woman standing on my porch. She's probably in her 40s, well-dressed, holding what looks like a manila envelope. I open the door and she says, "Are you Frank Morrison, the detective who worked the Sarah Mitchell case?" The blood in my veins turned to ice. Nobody had mentioned that name to me in over a decade. I just stood there, staring at her, trying to process what I was hearing. She continued, "My name is Sarah Mitchell. I think you've been looking for me." I'm not ashamed to admit that I had to grip the doorframe to steady myself. This woman, this adult woman, was claiming to be the 7-year-old girl who had vanished from Lincoln Park 36 years ago. The same case that had defined my early career, the same missing child whose face I could still draw from memory. But here's the thing that made my detective instincts kick in immediately. She looked exactly like what I would have expected Sarah Mitchell to look like as a grown woman. I invited her in and we sat in my living room. My hands were shaking as I poured her a glass of water. She opened that manila envelope and pulled out photographs, documents, and what appeared to be a birth certificate. "I know this is overwhelming," she said, "but I need you to know that everything you and your team did back then, all the searching, all the investigating, it mattered. You were on the right track." Sarah, if that's really who she was, began to tell me a story that defied everything I thought I knew about her disappearance. She told me that on that day in 1987, she hadn't been kidnapped by a stranger. She'd been taken by her own father, a man who wasn't supposed to have custody, a man who had been abusive to her mother. Her mother had been too terrified to tell us the truth during the investigation because he'd threatened to kill both of them if she ever revealed his involvement. According to Sarah, her father had been watching them at the park that day. When her mother went to the ice cream vendor, he approached Sarah and told her that her mother had sent him to pick her up. Being 7 years old and recognizing her father, she went with him willingly. He drove her across state lines that very night, and she spent the next several years living under a different name in a small town in Montana. But here's where the story gets even more incredible. Sarah told me that her father had kept newspaper clippings about her disappearance, about our investigation, about me specifically. He became obsessed with the case, constantly worried that we were getting close to finding them. He would move them from town to town whenever he got paranoid, always staying one step ahead of what he imagined was our ongoing pursuit. The psychological impact on Sarah was devastating. She grew up knowing she was a missing person, knowing that somewhere people were looking for her, but she was too young and too scared to reach out for help. Her father had convinced her that if she ever tried to contact anyone from her old life, he would hurt her mother. She lived in constant fear, always looking over her shoulder, never able to form lasting relationships because she could never tell anyone the truth about who she really was. What happened next in her story made me realize just how much this case had affected not just me, but everyone involved. Sarah's father died in a car accident when she was 19. Suddenly she was free, but completely lost. She had no idea how to reconnect with her old life, no idea if her mother was even still alive, no idea if anyone was still looking for her. She was paralyzed by fear and uncertainty. For the next 24 years, Sarah lived a quiet life, working various jobs, never staying in one place too long out of habit. She got married, had children, but never told anyone about her past. The weight of the secret was crushing her. She developed anxiety, depression, and a constant sense that she was living a lie. Then about 6 months ago, something changed. Sarah's oldest daughter, now 16, was doing a school project about cold cases and missing persons. While researching online, she stumbled across an old newspaper article about Sarah's disappearance. The photo in the article looked exactly like her mother as a child. When she showed it to Sarah, everything came crashing down. Sarah realized she couldn't keep living the lie. She needed to know what had happened to her mother, needed to make peace with her past, needed to finally tell someone the truth. She started researching the case online and found my name mentioned in several articles. Through some internet detective work, she managed to track down my address. But here's the part that still gives me goosebumps. Sarah told me that 3 days before she showed up at my door, she had a dream about her mother. In the dream, her mother was standing in Lincoln Park, in the exact spot where she'd disappeared, and she was telling Sarah that it was time to come home. Sarah woke up from that dream with an overwhelming urge to find me and tell me her story. I listened to all of this with the skepticism of a seasoned detective, but also with the hope of a man who had carried this case in his heart for 36 years. I asked her detailed questions about her childhood, about things only the real Sarah Mitchell would know. She answered every single one correctly. She described birthmarks that were documented in the case file, remembered specific toys she had, recalled details about her mother's apartment that were never made public. But the moment that convinced me beyond any doubt was when she pulled out a small worn teddy bear from her purse. It was brown with a red bow tie, and one of its eyes was missing. I recognized it immediately because her mother had given it to us during the investigation. It was Sarah's favorite toy, the one she'd been carrying when she disappeared. Her mother had told us that Sarah never went anywhere without that bear. Sarah looked at me with tears in her eyes and said, "I've carried Mr. Buttons with me every day for 36 years. Even when my father tried to throw him away, I would sneak him out of the trash. This bear was my connection to my real life, my real mother. I never gave up hope that someday I'd be able to bring him home." I had to excuse myself and go to my office to compose myself. There, I pulled out Sarah's case file and looked at the photo of Mr. Buttons that we'd taken for evidence. It was the same bear, no question about it. After 36 years, Sarah Mitchell had found her way back, and she'd brought the proof with her. When I returned to the living room, Sarah asked me the question I'd been dreading. "Is my mother still alive?" I had to tell her the truth. Her mother, Linda Mitchell, had died 8 years ago from cancer. She'd never stopped looking for Sarah, never stopped hoping she'd come home. Even on her deathbed, She'd asked the nurses to call me if anyone ever came looking for information about Sarah. The grief that washed over Sarah's face was heartbreaking. She'd spent all these years building up the courage to reconnect with her mother, only to learn she was too late. But then she asked me something that changed everything. Did she know I was alive? Did she ever believe I was still out there? I told her the truth. Linda Mitchell never gave up hope. She called me every year on Sarah's birthday and on the anniversary of her disappearance. She'd update me on any dream she'd had, any feeling she'd gotten, any psychic she'd consulted. She was absolutely convinced that Sarah was still alive somewhere, and she never stopped believing that one day her daughter would come home. Sarah broke down crying, but they were tears of relief mixed with grief. She'd spent decades feeling guilty for not trying harder to get back to her mother, but now she knew that her mother had never stopped loving her, never stopped believing in her. The story doesn't end there, though. Sarah asked me to help her connect with what remained of her family. Linda Mitchell had a sister, Sarah's aunt, who was still alive and living in Wisconsin. With trembling hands, I helped Sarah make the phone call that would reunite her with her family after 36 years. That phone call was one of the most emotional moments of my entire career. Sarah's aunt, Margaret, screamed when she heard Sarah's voice. She'd been at the park that day in 1987. She'd helped with the search. She'd mourned Sarah's disappearance for over 3 decades. Margaret immediately drove down to Chicago, and the reunion at my house was something I'll never forget. What struck me most about this entire experience was how it reminded me why I became a detective in the first place. It wasn't just about solving crimes or catching bad guys. It was about bringing closure to families, about never giving up hope, about believing that sometimes, against all odds, miracles do happen. Sarah and I have stayed in touch since that evening. She's been working with a therapist to process her trauma, and she's slowly rebuilding relationships with her extended family. Her children now know the truth about their mother's past, and they're proud of her courage in finally coming forward. But here's what really amazes me. Sarah told me that finding me wasn't just about getting closure for herself. She wanted to make sure I knew that all those sleepless nights, all those hours of investigation, all the care and dedication I'd put into her case, it had mattered. She wanted me to know that even though we never found her back then, the love and commitment we'd shown had given her hope during her darkest moments. 3 months later, I still think about that evening every single day. It's changed my perspective on cold cases, on retirement, on the impact we have on people's lives, even when we don't realize it. Sarah Mitchell taught me that sometimes the cases that haunt us the most are the ones that aren't really closed. They're just waiting for their moment to resolve themselves. If you're someone who works in law enforcement, or if you're a family member of a missing person, I want you to remember Sarah's story. Never give up hope. Keep believing. Keep searching. Because sometimes, after 36 years, missing people find their way home, and they bring their teddy bears with them.